do I? I said to my wife the other week, I wonder what it's going to be like when I get to 28. Anyway, I'm not going to speak long because I've just come to tell you that I've solved the crop circle mystery. I did them all. Yes, I solved the problem of being in the same place, several places at the same time, travelling faster than the speed of light, and how to clone Doug and Dave. So it's not a mystery really, as the media have confirmed to everyone. Doug and Dave did them all. But I think one of the implications of all that is the theme of what I'm going to talk about today. Because although we're talking about crop circles and crop patterns here, I'm only going to kind of touch on them because what I want to do, because loads of other people in the next 2 days will talk about them in detail, I want to put what is going on, including the crop circle phenomenon and how it's being rubbished and manipulated, into the wider context of who's doing it, why it's being done, and to what end. And the key theme through it all is control of the mind. A very few people in this world can only control nearly 5.5 billion and more if the vast majority of that 5.5 billion can be persuaded to give their minds away. And I remember back in the 80s, people around me, they were saying when the crop circle phenomenon became the crop pattern phenomenon, those amazing pictures in the fields around Britain and the world, which are getting even more amazing in the last few years. They were saying, more to life than meets the eye, mate. Hadn't they? Have you seen these? And then the scientists came out with letters after their name and said, oh, we've solved it, it's the wind. And people saying, it's the wind, have you seen them, And then came Doug and Dave with this ludicrous proposal, given great prominence by the Today newspaper, that they did them all. And suddenly the same people whose minds were being opened by the nature of the phenomenon were saying, oh no mate, no, rubbish, those two blokes did it. And it is incredible that we have one thing that lives forever, that lasts forever, that is ours forever, our mind, spirit, consciousness, and yet we are persuaded to give it away for 2 and 6 or to whoever will take it away from us. Here's my responsibility, tell me what to think. And if we do that, and my goodness me, as a human race, we've been persuaded to do it over a considerable period of time, then we are going to create a situation, we are going to, in effect, think into existence a situation where a very, very few people can and do control the nature of this world and the direction of this world. And the overwhelming foundation, bottom line method of doing it is to keep the human mind closed. So anything like UFO phenomena or the crop circle phenomena that is teasing open the human mind to see the true perspective and the massive infinite perspective of life in all its forms is very, very dangerous. And it's that overwhelmingly, from my perspective anyway, why a job was done on the crop circle phenomenon. To close down opening minds and inquiring minds. John F. Kennedy, I think his reality is probably rather different in many ways to his image. But he said one thing, whether he believed it or not, that was very true in 1962. He said, we seek the free flow of information. A nation that is afraid to let the people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation afraid of its people. We live in a nation and a world that is afraid of its people. And afraid to allow those people to become the true infinite beings that can be whatever they want to be, that we really are. That is very dangerous to the few who manipulate the world, and it's about time we started being dangerous by being ourselves and who we are. Because of what we've allowed to happen, because we've looked to others to tell us what to think and tell us what to do, we have created a situation in which we have in this world a colossal exclusion of knowledge. Take the areas of healing alone. In the world is a vast amount of healing knowledge. And yet, in the public arena, we have the choice, basically, between the scalpel and the drug. And all the other stuff is excluded. Because if you encompass that, the basis on which it works has to become public, has to become investigated further. And that's leading us on to finding out the true infinite potential that we all have and the nature of life itself. Very dangerous. So health, as part of this closing down of human potential and understanding of potential, has to be also closed down to the scalpel and the drug. It's got so ridiculous that my son Gareth, he's a goalkeeper, 13, and he damaged his hand a few weeks ago. And we went down the hospital to the casualty unit to see if he'd cracked a bone or something. So we're in this casualty unit, and this young doctor came in, and he had a shake around with it. And he said, no, it's not broken. He said, best thing for that is arnica. Now, I've nearly fallen off the chair here. I said, arnica. I said, how long have you been prescribing arnica? I said, it's great. He said, it really reduces the amount of time it takes for a blow like that to heal. I said, well, what do the authorities say? He said, don't tell them. He said, do you know, he said, I treat the nurses in this casualty unit homeopathically. He says, but I can't treat the patients except on the quiet. And he kind of got 2 bottles out. He said, yeah, that one, he says, he gave me the name, I can't remember it, he gave me the A, I think. He said, yeah, people come into a casualty unit, he said, traumatised because of what's happened to them normally. He says, so I put 2 drops of this on their tongue and it calms them down, it's great. Now, here we have a situation where we are paying for a national, I almost said health care service then, a human debris processing unit called the National Health Service. And we are allowing 57 million people in this country, a tiny few, to decide how we're treated. We've even given our bodies away along with our minds. But time of change is upon us. This exclusion of knowledge has allowed a situation to arise in which we are given the choice between 2 extremes. One God, one life, and then Judgment Day religion, which is great for control because actually, you know, if you do what God wants, you'll go to heaven and you'll have the afterlife and everything will be wonderful. Now, just as so happens that I know what God wants. So listen to me and everything's going to be fine. And on the other side, you've got this world is all there is science. Life's a bitch and then you die. Great news, isn't it? And what better way to shut people off from their true and infinite potential and in multi-levels of consciousness going into infinity, what better way of persuading people they are worthless than to persuade them we are cosmic accidents with no past, no future, and basically what's the point? And there's all these other explanations of wavelengths, of frequencies, of dimensions, of force fields, and all the things that relate to what actually creates crop circles and patterns is pushed aside. And it's pushed aside for the same reason that the crop circle phenomenon was rubbish and the same reason that the UFO and the healing area is rubbish, because it would open people's minds and that would be a disaster. So what I'm going to just go through this afternoon is the really calculated, organised, highly efficient way that this world is controlled. And the organisations that I'm talking about, and the pyramid I'm going to talk about, within that pyramid, decisions would have been made to do what happened with Doug and Dave and all that stuff. Just as the decisions are being made with UFOs and extraterrestrial knowledge and all the other stuff. The reason that this whole conspiracy, because it's not a conspiracy theory, it's provable fact, goes on is because it is a coup d'etat on the human mind. There is no way that 5.5 billion people can be controlled with tanks in the streets and soldiers at the door. It has to be done through the mind, to persuade people that either what you want to happen anyway is a good idea, or because of events that you manufacture, it's the only alternative. The great thing that arises out of this in this time of great change and this time of the cleansing of this planet and the removal of all this stuff, is that you start to realize that this great evil phenomenon called human nature is not evil at all. It can be shown and proved that every major negative global event in this century and before, come to that, was not the result of human nature being evil, it was the result of human nature being easy to manipulate. The First World War, the Second World War, the Bolshevik Revolution, all these things were created and engineered by the same group of people and organizations. So once this engineering of conflict and this engineering of great negative events, divide and rule, fear and all this stuff is removed, and we're going to see that in our lifetimes, then human nature in its true and infinite potential will be shown in its true glory, and it's very different to the human nature that we're supposed to believe is a reality. The whole direction of this manipulation, which goes under the names of things like the Great Work of Ages, the New World Order, is to create a situation in which we have, and are persuaded to accept, a world government to which all nation states would be colonies, a world central bank which will control all financial transactions, a one world currency which wouldn't be coins or cash, it would only be electronic money, cashless society, a one world army, and a microchipped population. And it's kind of staggering when you look not very far outside the public arena, just how close we are even to the latter, unless we wake up and start to rebel in a peaceful but extremely powerful way, and that's beginning to happen. This New World Order, as it's called, is this coup d'etat on the mind. And one way it happens all the time is what I call problem, reaction, solution. You secretly create a problem. It may be a terrorist bomb, it may be a run on a currency, it may be a war. You create, through your media, propaganda relating to that problem, which gets public opinion, the mass consciousness, to the point where it says something must be done. Something must be done, this can't go on, something must be done, do something. Once anyone, an individual or a nation or whatever, is in something must be done mode, will accept any damn thing as long as something's done. And at that point, those who have secretly created the problem then openly offer the solution to the problem they have created, which takes us on into the desired direction. Desired direction of more centralized control. If you want more authoritarian police, you want more armed police, you want cameras in the streets, you want the erosion of basic freedoms, and you want the public not only not to oppose you, but to demand that you do it, you need more violent, high-profile crime. Creating a welfare state, removing any alternatives to the welfare state, and then pulling away the rug of the welfare state, which brings about more crime as a result, is a great way of creating a situation and people say something must be done. If you can get the mass human mind fearful of crime, they will demand you take their freedoms away. I turned on the radio a few weeks ago, Radio 5, and I heard an item about cameras in the streets. And this council guy from Norwich, Norfolk, somewhere in Norfolk, he said, well, we're having cameras in the streets because, you know, there's homeless people all over this country. You can't get homes because there's no money. If you're a council and you want cameras in the streets, the government write the cheque. How much do you want? And he said that they were having cameras in the streets, but he said, to be honest, he said, crime rates in our area don't justify cameras in the streets, but our people think they do, so we're putting them up to make them feel better. Problem, reaction, solution. In 1986, someone bought an IBM copier at a second-hand sale in America, and when they got it home, they found a long and detailed document inside called Silent Weapons for a Quiet War, which outlined, was basically a mass mind controller's manual. It explains how the mass consciousness is duped. And let's read a short passage from it, see what you think in relation to the present world. It's been going since the 1950s, according to this document. Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public ignorant of basic systems principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized and distracted by matters of no real importance on the other hand. This is achieved by 1. Disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of education in mathematics, logic, systems design and economics, and discouraging technical creativity. Engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, brackets, mental and emotional rape, by way of a constant barrage of sex, violence and wars in the media, especially the TV and the newspapers. By giving them what they desire in excess, quotes, junk food for thought, and by depriving them of what they really need. By rewriting history and law, dropping your watch on the floor, and subjecting public opinion to the deviant creation. Deviant creation I've always taken to be, don't let them know who they are. Thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude their interest in and discovery of the silent weapons of social automation. The general rule, it said, is that there is profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer the solutions. When we get into opposing bits of information coming into the public arena about something, take crop circles for a start, it creates confusion, it muddies the waters. And what the human mind tends to do in those situations is switch off and walk away. Well, I know my mother, she says to me often, you know, oh, I don't know, I don't. She said, they tell you sugar's bad for you, then they tell you it's good for you, I can't be bothered. And we do that, confusing the situation. That's why the economic system is projected at us as so complicated when it's so damn simple. It's because we get confused and we switch off and think, well, we'll let the experts get on with it. Diversion summary. Media, it said, keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. Schools, keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law and real history. Entertainment, keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level. You've seen the National Lottery programme every week? And finally, work, keep the public busy, busy, busy with no time to think, back on the farm with the other animals. So if we apply this to a topical theme, the criminal justice bill. About 2 years ago now, you couldn't open a newspaper or turn on the television without seeing travellers or a problem stories all over the place. They were being turned back from on roads, and the convoys and the police were there and the cameras always happened to be there. There were riots here and such like. There were councils banning them from passing across the border. As a result of that, the public were persuaded, a large number anyway, something must be done, these people, yobbos. And we had the criminal justice bill. I was thinking the other day, have the travellers gone to Mars or what? Where are they? You know, maybe they've just demanifested and gone off in a spaceship or something. I can keep opening the Daily Express and the Mirror and I keep turning on the 9 o'clock news. I don't see travellers are a problem stories. But something's happened in the meantime. The legislation that propaganda was created to allow to become law had become law, almost on the nod, all party support. Because a coup d'etat had been achieved on the mind of many people in this country. When legislation's coming out, it's not announced just after it's been decided, it's actually decided way, way back there. And the time between then and it being made public, the softening up process of the human mind goes on against the target group. So, next time a load of travellers are a problem stories come up, or there's some other kind of constant bombardment of this group are a problem, then you know some legislation against that group is coming along because your mind's being softened up to accept it. So how can this happen across the globe? It can happen because everything from a small business to a multinational company to a secret society is structured as a pyramid. And so is the global pyramid that controls the direction of the world. At the top of the pyramid, any pyramid, no matter what it is, you've got a very, very tiny few people that know everything there is to know about that organisation. They know its direction, its motivation, its real agenda. The further you come back down from that point, and those very few people, you're meeting more and more and more and more people who know less and less and less and less about what those at the top know. So within this global pyramid are those who run the banks, the oil companies, the other multinational companies, the military, the intelligence agencies, the media, the armament companies, and so on. And because of this thing called compartmentalization, most of the people within that pyramid don't know they're being manipulated to a common goal. People who work in the banks to quite a high level won't realise that they're actually part of a pyramid that is also working to the same plan that the intelligence agencies are working to, and the military is working to, and the media is working to at the higher levels. So we have this situation, and it could only be like this to work, where within this pyramid, probably 90-odd% of the people involved don't know they're being manipulated to manipulate everyone else. So those people you see around the phenomena of UFOs and stuff like that, and those people that are like the police on the animal protests not far from here, they won't realise what they're actually part of. Many of the people in the CIA won't know what they're actually part of because they are compartmentalised. They only know their part. And I was talking to someone the other week from GCHQ at Cheltenham, and he tells me, he used to work there, that that building is actually structured physically like that, compartmentalised. You have to have a certain card, and you can only, with that card, go into the area in which you work in. You can't go anywhere else, and that is a great symbolic structure of how this pyramid works. If you look at the Freemasons at the highest levels, they are seriously involved in all this. The vast majority of Freemasons in the world are actually on the bottom 3 levels of degree. In other words, knowledge of the game plan. And you take the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, above those bottom 3 levels where the vast majority are, another 33. And there's another group on top of that called Illuminized Freemasonry, which is an infiltrated version. And so the Freemasons that go down the lodge in Sussex or wherever won't have a clue what they're actually involved in. Within this pyramid, as I say, are all the major elements of our society globally that decide its direction. The elite at the very top of the pyramid probably can't be named, but just not too far from the top, you can start picking off a few names of people in the world today that are knowingly involved in manipulating the world into this centralized control that I talk about. The Rockefellers in America, that family, have been very much involved in it. People, especially a guy called David Rockefeller, the head of the Chase Manhattan Bank. Henry Kissinger, the former US Secretary of State, is a global manipulator extraordinaire, and of course he's a very, very close associate of Lord Carrington, the well-known British cabinet minister and former Secretary General of NATO. Two names that keep coming up again and again once you start pulling back the layers and the smoke screens to all this. Within this global pyramid are other pyramids that work to specific areas. The most important of them, one of the most important at least, one that controls the direction of the world day by day, although the vast majority of people, even journalists, probably especially journalists, will have never have heard of it. Towards the end of the last century, there was a guy called Cecil Rhodes who was seriously into world government. He created something called the Round Table Secret Society. And out of that, after the First World War, from 1920 onwards, this core secret society started knocking out and creating offshoots, so it became a network. And this network today is one of the great manipulation networks of the planet. In 1920 came the first offshoot of the Round Table, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, still based at London, in Chatham House, and still manipulating like crazy day after day while presenting itself as an innocent think tank that just invites the top presidents and politicians of the world to come and debate. The president, or one of the 3 presidents of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, along with Jim Callaghan and Lord Jenkins, is Lord Carrington. It is a major centre of manipulation of British foreign and domestic policy, and much wider afield as well. One of its members is Henry Kissinger. In 1920 came the American equivalent of that, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is there to direct, and certainly does, American foreign and domestic policy. Among its membership, you'll find all the presidents of the United States since the 1920s, the top bankers, industrialists, media owners, journalists and executives, military leaders, government officials, and so on. It's controlled by the Rockefellers, and one of its leading executives is Henry Kissinger. In 1954 came the third element of the Round Table Network, known as the Bilderberg Group, named after a hotel in Holland where it first met in 1954. Its president from the first meeting until the mid-1970s was Prince Bernhard of the House of Orange in the Netherlands, who has a very interesting CV. He was a member of the German SS before the war, member of German intelligence during the war, and chairman of Shell Oil after the war. Not sure if they're linked, but it's an interesting combination. The Bilderberg Group works like all of them. They have an inner core which works full-time to manipulate the world. They then have a next circle of people who are top people in all the different elements of life that I've been talking about. For instance, the Director General of NATO is always a Bilderberg Group appointment. Lord Carrington was Bilderberg Group. Is Bilderberg Group when he was Secretary General of NATO. Manfred Werner was Bilderberg Group when he was appointed Secretary General. He died last year, and this guy Willie Place came in, another regular Bilderberger. So you've got the next circle of people which carry out the Bilderberg plan in their sphere of influence, whether it be the media, intelligence, or whatever. And then you've got a next circle of Bilderberg attendees who are just there to be sold the party line and basically haven't got a clue what's going on. Not much of one anyway. The chairman of the Bilderberg Group since 1991 has been Lord Carrington, and one of its controlling executives is Henry Kissinger. It's funded and controlled largely by the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, although, as I keep saying, there is another layer above the people I'm talking about where the real control lies, and my own view increasingly is that outside of this human pyramid is an extraterrestrial influence on all this as well, through the consciousness of those involved, which may sound amazing, but what the hell's amazing anymore? The last element I'll talk about, there's another thing called the Club of Rome as well, but the last element I'll talk about of this network is the Trilateral Commission, which is, by its name, pulling together the manipulation in three areas of the world: Britain and Europe, America and Japan. It was set up in 72-73 by David Rockefeller at the Chase Manhattan Bank and a guy called Zbigniew Brzezinski. Now, the Trilateral Commission had as its first goal, when it was set up in 72-73, to put one of its members in the White House as President of the United States. It did it at the next election, when Jimmy Carter became President of the United States. And if you look at the Carter administration, it's like a Trilateral Commission Sports and Social Club annual outing. It's unbelievable. Walter Mondale, Vice President, Trilateral Commission. Cyrus Vance, Secretary of State, Trilateral Commission. National Security Advisor, a key post, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the guy who set up the Trilateral Commission, and so on and so forth. And one of its controlling core executives is Henry Kissinger. Among the members in this country, Lord Carrington, David Owen, Dennis Healy, Lord Jenkins, and many others. So what we're looking at here are organisations within organisations. Within the intelligence agencies that clearly did a job on the crop circle phenomenon will be people working compartmentalised, who think they're just doing a job on that, don't realise how it's actually linked across the spectrum of the pyramid to a much wider picture of closing down the human mind and pushing us in this direction of centralisation and giving even more of our minds away. And this pyramid that I've just talked about then links in with the other secret societies, like the Freemasons, the Knights of Malta and such like, and one in America, which is particularly sinister, called the Skull and Bones Society, which was created by the Russell family in the last century, using part of the fortune they made from running drugs to China. The best known Skull and Bones member today is George Bush, the last president of the United States. And I've not really seen George in the same light since I realised what the initiation ceremony is for Skull and Bones Society. You lie naked on your back in a coffin while you shout out details of your sexual experiences while wearing a ribbon in a very strategic place. I've not really seen George in the same light since then, I've got to be honest. When he comes on the telly, I really don't see him in the same light. I want a kinder, gentler America. But I'll screw anyone who tries to stop me. Crazy. This guy became head of the CIA and President of the United States. And the Bush family goes back into all this a long way to Prescott Bush's father, one of the funders of Adolf Hitler. And when we look at this whole area of politics, there's a great fundamental smokescreen that reveals a fundamental truth. And that is that we don't live in a democracy in this country. We don't live in a democracy in America, we don't live in a democracy in this world. Again, coup d'etat on the mind. If we lived in an obvious tyranny, an obvious dictatorship, where we knew the media was controlled and we knew the government information machine was controlled and we knew everything was controlled, then the natural human desire for freedom would rebel. It's much harder when we live in a tyranny that is projected as a democracy. When we live in a dictatorship but think we're free. The person who decides who becomes President of the United States is the one that controls the media and the money. Who control the media and the money? Those who control the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. The cost of running for president these days, the cost of running to just run for president within your own party is ridiculous. To run for president, it's off the wall money. Only a very few can produce it. And those that produce it want some return for it. So anyone who becomes President of the United States at the moment, under the present system, is what the manipulators want to become President of the United States. And when you start to look at their background, we are looking at a one-party state. We're looking at a one-party state in America, and we're looking at a one-party state in this country. For instance, Bill Clinton is a Democrat, so he must be different and have a different agenda to George Bush, because he was a Republican. Seems ever so simple. Tony Blair must be different to John Major. I can't work out how, but he must be in some way, because they represent different parties. They're opposition, for goodness sake. They shout at each other. It's obvious. But it's funny how many similarities there are. For instance, President Clinton and George Bush have an amazing affinity to the drug trade. Amazing. President Clinton became president only because the media in America did not print what they know, which is that Bill Clinton is a provable drug money launderer, responsible for stealing millions and millions of dollars from Arkansas taxpayers, and his name is implicated in the background to at least 12 murders. A few weeks ago, in the early part of this year, the Washington Post ran a story, we're going to run a story, a 4,000-word article, which talked about one of the biggest drug-running operations in modern history in America, out of a place called the Mena Airstrip in Arkansas, right under the nose of Bill Clinton. The type was set, the illustrations were done, the lawyers had been through every line to check it legally and accurately, in its accuracy. And at the very, very last minute, the Washington Post pulled the story. Very much linked to Bill Clinton and implicated Bill Clinton. Now, no one seems to know why and who decided that that story was going to be pulled at the last minute when everything had been done. All I can tell you is that the owner of the Washington Post is a lady called Katharine Graham. She's a member of the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and she must be meeting Henry Kissinger about every 10 minutes. That story in the Washington Post that never was also implicated George Bush and Ronald Reagan, because this was going on at the Mena Airstrip in Arkansas. At the time, they were in the White House, and the Iran-Contra scandal was going on when the Americans were taking arms down to the Nicaraguan terrorists and bringing back in return drugs for the children of America. When one of the planes came down and the whole thing was blown, pilot who was killed in the crash was found to have George Bush's private White House number in his pocket. George Bush got away with it because who controls the media and who controls the running of government in America? It's also interesting how both Bill Clinton and George Bush, these opponents, are implicated in the BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which was the biggest drug money and illegal arms money laundering operation the planet's yet seen. Bill Clinton's biggest financial backer when he became president was one of the founders of the BCCI. So we're looking here at an illusion. As we're looking at an illusion in this country, an illusion of democracy, an illusion of choice, it is impossible at the next election to vote for any party with any chance of forming a government that is not in favour of more centralisation of power in Europe, one European central bank and one European currency. You cannot vote against that. If we do not have choice, we do not have democracy, and that is what we don't have. When Bill Clinton, Democrat, replaced George Bush, Republican, wasn't the result of democracy or choice. It was musical chairs between two aspects of the same one-party state. George Bush, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Skull and Bones Society, 33rd degree Freemason, was replaced by Bill Clinton, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, Rhodes Scholar, and 33rd degree Freemason. I turned on the telly a few years ago now, and I saw this rather unpleasant experiment going on in a laboratory with a mouse. It was a behavioural experiment. They rigged up this network of glass tubes. And they put the mouse in the tube, and every now and again the mouse ran along the tube, and it had the choice of going left or right down another tube, and then a bit further and left or right again down another tube. And that mouse thought it was free. And yet its choice was fundamentally controlled. And in these mass mind controllers manuals, they even have terms for it. It's become a science. They call it managed choice, controlled choice, the illusion of choice. And what about the one-party state in this country? A lady called Dr. Kitty Little is a long-time researcher into corruption and infiltration within the British intelligence agencies. Her scientific career has included research for the Ministry of Aircraft Production during the last war, followed by 9 years at the Atomic Energy Research Establishment. In letters to the Commander of Scotland Yard's Special Branch on November 27, 1986, and to the Speaker of the House of Commons, Bernard Weatherall, on May 1, 1987, she tells the story of what happened to her at Oxford University in 1940. She was invited to join the Communist Party at Oxford University, she says. But by the time she got round to going to a meeting, the Communist Party had, quote, gone underground and joined the Labour Party. So when she turns up, she's attending a Labour Party meeting. The Speaker and the other people there thought they were among like-minded people. They didn't realise that for some reason, as these things happen, she was sitting there as an observer and not was actually of like mind, quite the opposite actually. She said the Speaker that night, who was to become very famous, said that there was a plot to destabilise the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, ready for a centralised takeover. She later realised, as she did more research, that this was actually an element of this New World Order centralisation of the planet, not just Britain. And that there was a plan to destroy Britain's defences, engineer a Marxist takeover in Rhodesia that would be disguised as democracy. Now we have dictatorship by Robert Mugabe, of course, to replace the dictatorship by Ian Smith. Not a lot of choice, really, for the people. And to use what she didn't realise was what it was at the time, but soon she did, to use what became known as the European Economic Community as a smokescreen, a Trojan horse, for the centralisation of control and economic control of Europe. The Speaker that night said that members of this conspiratorial group were going to infiltrate the British Parliament by entering the right wing of the Labour Party and the left wing of the Conservative Party. He said that the British distrusted extremists by reflex action, so basically they were going to pose as moderates, and in doing so, they could then dismiss their opponents as extremists. Right-wing extremists, that's what they will call them. The speaker said that he'd been chosen to become the head of the political section of the conspiracy in the UK, and as a result he expected himself to become eventually Prime Minister of Britain. That was in 1940, and the speaker's name was Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson was Prime Minister of the UK from 1964 to 75, apart from 4 years when a man on the left wing of the Conservative Party replaced him, Ted Heath. These two opponents had much in common, not least their desire, in Ted Heath's case an obsessional desire, for an integrated Europe with central control to this very day. Coincidence all this? Well, maybe it is, but in a democracy, if that's what we have, we should know these things. One thing is for sure, the European Union, like the United Nations, is a Trojan horse for centralised control on the way to the New World Order. I've researched the background to the League of Nations, which was tried and failed after the First World War, the United Nations and the European Economic Community that came after the Second World War, and all of those organisations were created by the same people. Members of the Round Table, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, and later the Bilderberg Group. They're working to a philosophy espoused by a German philosopher, probably other people too, called Hegel. I don't think Hegel was in all this, he just identified the phenomena. He said if you create two opposing sides and you bring them into conflict, that conflict will give birth to a third force, almost a fusion of the two. He called it antithesis, the thesis equals synthesis, or words to that effect. A lot of words for me now. If you want to introduce world government, then it's not just going to happen. If the nation state and the communities are working well together in harmony, and you come along and say, well, what we need is a world government, mate. And people say, oh, look, if it's not broke, don't fix it, mate. Go and have a cup of tea, everything's fine. You have to create problem, reaction, solution. So if you want a world government, you need to create massive conflict between the nation states to the point where people say something must be done. This can't go on, this nation state thing, this nationalism. Well, let's have a jaw instead of war organisation then. It was tried with the League of Nations, and then it became, after the Second World War, the United Nations and the European Community. Take the European Community as an example of another coup d'etat of the mind speciality, the stepping stones approach. This manipulation of our minds has become a science, a great social science. And the stepping stones approach demands that you never go so far that people start to see what's going on. So you go so far to your goal, which you know you're going to anyway. And then when people have got settled with that, or you've got them stitched up anyway, then you go to the next one. So take the European Community. When the European Community was created, it was always going to be what it is becoming. But if that was proposed back in the 40s or the 50s, like we're going to have a central bank, one currency, centralised political control, etc., we'd have said, I should cocoa, we've just fought a war, mate. You know, for freedom, we're not going to give you without a gun being fired, what Hitler couldn't take. So it's stepping stones. We join a free trade area, the European Economic Community, and our economy is integrated into everyone else's. Gotcha! You're now in the web. Withdrawing your economy from that becomes a nightmare in the short term. Utter chaos. So, gotcha now. Well, we're more than an economic community, aren't we? We're a community, you know. So it would not be economic out. Stepping stone. Then we'll give more power to European agencies because we need to coordinate policy, don't we? A bit. Stepping stone. Then we'll have Maastricht, because we're not just a community, we're a union now. Okay, right, we're the European Union, so stepping stone. Now, it's ridiculous, we've got all these problems with the currency and the ERM, which we've actually caused, but we won't tell them that. So we've got a problem here. Well, if we have one currency, and if we have one central bank, we can get across all this, and all this manipulation of currencies. Stepping stone. And of course, now we've had this great burst of freedom in the former Soviet Union, we can have more countries come in and become part of this European Union. Stepping stone, stepping stone, stepping stone. And it's like, I've got a boy who's 2 years of age, and I look at him, and he doesn't look any different day by day. People come and see me, I haven't seen me for 6 months, and they say, God, Jamie, haven't you grown? It's only when, because these things are happening day by day in our lives, it's only when you stop and look back at how far we've come, you realise how many stepping stones have been put into place. And that's how we're being manipulated again all the time. So it was very interesting that in my research I came across a quote from a book written by Joseph Stalin in 1942, when there was no talk of any European communities in the public arena. He said this: divide the world into regional groups as a transitional stage to world government. Populations will more readily abandon their national loyalty to a vague regional loyalty than they will for a world authority. Later, the regional can be brought all the way to a super world dictatorship, which is exactly what is happening before our eyes, and all this stuff about we want the veto and we want this load of rubbish for our minds only. And the foundation stones of this manipulation is money. What I call funny money. What controls our lives and gets us to conform more than anything else? Debt. The need to service debt and the need to pay bills. So, if you can create a situation where the basics of life, like a house or whatever, cost so much money that you have to keep your head down to keep servicing the debt to have a roof over your head, you've got them. Funny money. Funny money is this great ruse. Oh, it's great work if you can get it. What you do is you lend people money that doesn't exist and you charge them interest on it. You know, if I had somebody at the door there, and when people left, they were saying, right, here's something, $5.99, doesn't exist, pay up. You know, you say that Ike's a con man, you know, call the police. If I had someone on the door saying, here's something that doesn't exist, $5.99, and by the way, if you don't pay me for it, I'm going to take you to court and I'll take your house away, or your property away, you'd say we lived in a fascist state. I've just described the banking system that controls this country and this world. And we stand for it. 5.5 billion of us stand for it, and a handful of people control it. You know, banks are lending something like, at least, on average, £10,000 for every £1,000 they actually have. Some of the global banks in the upper economic reaches of this global elite pyramid are lending through something, a little ruse called fractional reserve lending, $26,000 for every $1,000 they actually own. And people are paying interest on it. So the overwhelming amount of debt that controls our lives is debt on money that doesn't exist. Credit, fresh air money. There is one grotesque fact that comes from all this. That the third world debt, which is crucifying large tracts of our fellow humanity as I speak across this planet, is debt on money that largely, overwhelmingly, has never, does not, and will never exist. And we stand for it. How many more people would have a home in this world and in this country if we only had to buy one instead of three? Because that's what we do. I went into the National Westminster Bank up north a few months ago, and I got it in black and white. I got one of their mortgage leaflets, just out of interest, and there it was. If I took out a £50,000 mortgage with a NatWest bank, I would pay them in return £152,000. And on the front of this leaflet, what did it say? The National Westminster Bank, we're here to make life easier. Who benefits? You buy a £60,000 house, every single person involved in the creation of that house is paid out £60,000. The builder, the supplier, everyone. One person benefits from us buying 3 houses to live in one, the banker, who we are paying back money that doesn't exist. We haven't given our minds away. What? Why? Indeed, it is not beyond human invention for a government that serves the people rather than serves the global elite, which they do, to print their money interest-free and stop borrowing it at interest rates from the private banking cartels and lend it to the people interest-free to buy houses. So, under that, the people of this country would pay for one house to live in one house. We could do that tomorrow. We do not do that because the politicians do not serve people, they serve those they are beholden to, which are the global elite, the banking elite. So we have a grotesque situation in America where the interest rate policies and the economic policies of America are decided by the Federal Reserve Board, the Central Bank of America, and that is a private banking cartel. Nothing to do with the government. Federal is there, again, to dupe us. And one other thing on this economic situation. What's the difference between a depression and a boom? Is a depression when people stop wanting or needing goods and services? No, no. A depression is merely when there is not enough pieces of paper with someone's face on or electronic figures theoretically in circulation to exchange for goods and services. That's it. Only difference. Who controls how much of this stuff's in circulation? The global banking elite do. So they decide when we have a depression and when we have a boom. If you want to get a regime out of a country without actually shooting anybody, then you create a run economically on that country. And the people say, get rid of them, they're useless. And they're out. The Federal Reserve Bank in America has a guy working for it called Hemphill, Robert H. Hemphill, credit manager of the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta. And he eventually saw the light of what was going on, and he said this is a staggering thought, he said. We are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. We are absolutely without a permanent money system. When one gets a complete grasp of the picture, he said, the tragic absurdity of our position is almost incredible, but there it is. And it goes further than that, because when we take out a loan, say for £20,000, conjured into some kind of theoretical existence is £20,000, even though most of it doesn't exist. It's new money in a sense, it's in circulation in a sense, but only a sense. But we're not paying back £20,000, we're paying back £20,000 plus interest. Where's the interest going to come from? It's not being created into existence as new money in any form. It can only come from one place, and that is the wealth and the other money floating around the world at that time. So every time we pay back a loan as a business, a company, a country, an individual, the interest payments on that loan are sucking the wealth of the world into the banking system. And by now, the same group of people own the global banks, the global oil companies, the global armament companies, the global drug companies, the global media, on and on it goes. Controlling the centralized direction of the world, not whether we come here today or don't, not whether we cross the road or don't, but the direction of the world in all these areas suddenly becomes far easier than it would at first seem to be. In any coup d'etat of the mind, the media are vital, because that is the medium through which you pound out the messages, the mantras, which is what they are, that get people to think in a certain way if we're not aware of it. And so it's no surprise to find that these organisations I've talked about have massive influence in the media, and these banking cartels I'm talking about, those involved, actually own the media and finance the media. You don't read about Bilderberg group meetings in the Washington Post, one of the most influential newspapers in the United States, when one of its core executives is Katharine Graham, the owner of the Washington Post, one of the core executives of the Bilderberg Group. You don't read about the Bilderberg Group in the Daily Telegraph or the Sunday Telegraph in this country. Yet one of the members of the inner core of the Bilderberg Group is Conrad Black, who owns Telegraph newspapers through a company called the Hollinger Corporation, which also owns The Spectator and around 200 other newspapers and magazines worldwide. The two international advisors to the Hollinger Corporation on the board are Henry Kissinger and Lord Carrington. Lord Carrington is also a director of Telegraph newspapers. Incidentally, I read a feature in the Sunday Telegraph which basically said there is nothing sinister whatsoever or nothing to worry about with Lord Wakeham leaving a privatising government and becoming directors of the merchant bank N.M. Rothschild, which got an enormous amount of money advising governments on privatisation with departments that Lord Wakeham was involved in. No problem, said the Daily Telegraph. What the Telegraph didn't say was one of the directors of Telegraph newspapers is Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, the chairman of the merchant bank N.M. Rothschild. They must have forgot about that. You don't read about Bilderberg Group meetings in The Sun today, The Times, Sunday Times, or the News of the World. Funny really, because one of its core executives is of that Rupert Murdoch News International organisation that owns all those newspapers, is a guy called Andrew Knight, a member of the Bilderberg Group, Inner Sanctum. Knight used to be a top executive of Conrad Black's Telegraph newspapers. People in America are told that they have a choice of news because they have 3 national television networks in America, NBC, CBS and ABC. What they don't tell you is that when you look behind the front directors and the nominee directors and all that stuff, you find that every single one of those networks in America, NBC, CBS and ABC, are owned by the same people. Rockefeller, Morgan, Rothschild. So when Douglas Hurd, as Home Secretary, said broadcasting will not be run by tycoons, I thought, what a relief. Before I look at some of the solutions, let's talk about 2 other elements in this whole area of manipulation. The world army and the microchipped population. You know, when we look at the Rwandas and we look at the former Yugoslavias and these horrific situations around the world, and we see the United Nations peacekeeping forces being ineffective, from our point of view, that's a bad thing. We don't want them to be ineffective because we don't want those horrors to unfold. If you are a manipulator who wants a world government and wants the public to demand that you do it, having an ineffective UN peacekeeping force is absolutely essential, because it creates the something must be done scenario. And now we're seeing the Director, Secretary General of the United Nations and the people around him and the manipulators in the press that are controlled around there, saying what we need is a much more effective UN peacekeeping force, in effect a world army. Because what's happening is people are looking at these things and they're saying something must be done, this can't go on in Rwanda or what have you. And they're saying, well look, we'd love to be as effective as you want us to be, but of course if we're going to do that we need a standing world army based at the UN, which we can make our own decisions, we don't have to ask nation states for permission, we don't have to have endless debates, we can just go and do it. You let us do that and we'll be as effective as you want. Problem, reaction, solution. And that's getting closer all the time. The microchipped population is something that, on the face of it, people find hardest to take. But it's amazing how close we are. It's being projected at us from many, many different ways. That actually, it's a good idea to, for instance, get rid of cash. We're talking all the time now about the cashless society. I opened the Times newspaper a few weeks ago, and it said that the new European currency, they were having a problem with it. I thought, aye. The problem of putting coins and notes into circulation would hold it back. Oh, what a shame. So, actually though, we might have a solution to that. Oh, aye, what's that then? Well, we could have an electronic currency. Oh God, never would have guessed that. And what is the consequence of an electronic currency to freedom? It's very simple. The bits of paper and stuff in our pockets may not seem to be a great bulwark of freedom, but it is. If we go into a shop or a garage now and we hand over a credit card, say, electronic money, and they put it through the machine and they say, oh, sorry, won't accept it, sir. And you say, oh, well, I don't understand that. Anyway, I'll pay cash. What happens when there is no cash? And the computer says, sorry, there is no way we can purchase. One of the ultimate controls. We're also seeing now a situation where supermarkets are being fed this process of people going around with a barcoded card and totting up their own tins of beans as they go around the supermarket and then paying electronically as they go out without any checkout people. We're also seeing the microchipped credit card, identity card. We're also seeing the problem of missing children being highlighted more and more. Just as animals increasingly are now microchipped. I mean, the Queen's just had the corgis done apparently, and linked to a computer, and it was sold as, you'll never lose Fido again. Same thing will be used, and is being used, in terms of children and such like. This is a bombardment. Then someone sent me, because the more I kind of talk and people read the books and stuff, they start sending me stuff that I don't see necessarily in the papers. I got about 3 or 4 versions a couple of weeks ago of a Sunday Times article, which the headline was, Internet, it's all in the mind. Well, you saw that. What they're saying is, the opening line said, the next computer you buy may be your last one, because now they're going to put a little microchip in the back of your neck, and instead of typing in words, you're going to think them in. It wasn't April the 1st because I checked. And this whole bombardment of microchipped identity cards, credit cards in a cashless society, all this stuff will culminate in, look, mate, we've got these identity cards, people are losing them, they're getting hassled by police, we've got a problem here. I mean, we've got all this credit card fraud and stuff like that, and we've got a problem here. We've got these missing children, and that's a real problem and all that stuff. We've got a problem there. Now look, we could solve this with modern technology. A little microchip about that size, grain of rice and less, stick it in there, no problem, got the lot. And I was interested, as a result of all this, to read a piece in Nexus magazine last year by a guy called Carl W. Sanders, who's a highly acclaimed electronics engineer in America, who was saying that he was developing with his team a microchip to help spinal injury patients. And he said it was hijacked by the One World Brigade, including Henry Kissinger. God, he gets everywhere, that man. And basically he was saying that they wanted to turn this chip from one of helping spinal injury patients into one of control into a global computer. And one of the things they talked about was highlighting missing children's stories. Something must be done. And he was also saying that once the chip is in there, then they can not only send messages from the chip to the computer, but from the computer to the chip. They can make people depressed or joyous or angry or whatever on a mass scale. And when you look at all the kind of prophecies from many different cultures going back, these are the themes that run through them. There is another theme that runs through them also, and that is a time when this stuff gets wiped away and we start to be who we really are, and we start to live on a planet that we can be proud of. That is the time we're in. This time of the great cleansing is upon us. I don't go into all that stuff that I've been talking about so far just for the sake of it. It's not something to be frightened of, it is something to be aware of. Something, I hope, that will persuade more and more people that if we give our minds away, then someone will take massive advantage of that. What we've actually done is think this whole thing into existence. It is a massive thought form. For me, we create our own reality. We create our own reality as an individual, and we create our own reality as a human race. For me, we are taking these magnetic energies into ourselves and these multidimensional levels of ourselves minute by minute, and we are projecting out into the aura around us, the great energy field that is us around us. These energies that we take in and out, in and out, in and out. The difference between the energy coming in and the energy we project is that when we project it, it carries the inner pattern of us, what we think of ourselves, basically. And that magnetic pattern is unique to us because it is a unique reflection of us. And magnetically, we will attract to us that reality. If we think that life's a struggle, if we think we are worthless and useless and can't do anything, then that's the reality we'll create, because that's the reality magnetically we'll attract to us. The other magnetic energy fields of people, places, experiences that reflect that inner feeling of self. So when we are looking around for someone to blame for what's going on in the world, there is no one to blame, not even ourselves, but it comes from ourselves. We're creating our reality. This kind of came home to me when although it didn't come home to me at the time, I only realised it on reflection, when I was a journalist. Back in the days when Erin Pitsey was doing a great deal of work with what were known then as battered wives hospitals, I went along as a television reporter to do a film on one of them. And what kind of staggered me at the time, it doesn't stagger me anymore, is the number of women in that hostel who were on their second, third partner who was knocking the living daylights out. And I thought at the time, why the hell do you keep going around with people who do that? Now I kind of realised what was going on. The other common theme of the women I met was a total lack of self-worth. They did not like themselves seriously very much. So, for me, what happens is that inner lack of self-worth doesn't desire to be punished, but just thinks it ought to be, because it's so useless. And that magnetic pattern attracts to it an energy field of a man who so hates himself that he's looking for a mirror to thrash out rather than face what's actually the cause of his anger. I've never met myself, since I've got into all this stuff and I've started observing people more, and from this perspective, I've never yet met a very aggressive man who didn't hate the hell of himself. So what happens is when one relationship breaks down because of various experiences, unless the woman starts to feel good about herself and realize the true potential and the fact that there is no such thing as a worthless human being, that energy field attracts a similar energy field the next time, and so it goes on. And the pattern is only broken when the sense of self changes. Therefore the magnetic pattern changes, therefore what we attract changes. Connected to what I talked about this afternoon, we have a collective mind in humanity, which manifests itself as the 100th monkey syndrome, where they've shown that once a certain number of a species learn something new, inexplicably, apparently, from this world is all there is science anyway, many or most, if not all, of that species suddenly can do it without being shown. For me, what is happening there is there comes a critical mass of the new knowledge learned by those members of the species being shown something. It becomes powerful enough at the collective level for every member of that species to access it. And it's much easier for animal species to do that because they don't read the sun and turn on the 9 o'clock news or Tomorrow's World that tells them black is white and white is black, and there are no other levels, so don't worry about it. But we have that anyway. We have that too. And I feel that that collective magnetic energy field, known as the collective mind, also creates its own reality. So if we are persuaded to give our minds away, and to give our responsibility away and say, well look, somebody else do that. When anything goes wrong in the world, we say, what are they going to do about it? Something must be done. Go on. We will think into existence precisely that structure. We will create a physical manifestation of what is the dominating thought patterns in the collective mind. And if among those dominating thought patterns are, I am not good enough, so therefore someone who is better than me must run the world because they've been to university and they've got letters after their name and he's a sir and all this stuff, and he's an economist talking stuff I don't really understand, so he must know what he's on about, then that giving that responsibility, that power away, will create a physical manifestation of that, and the physical manifestation of that is known as the New World Order. What we're looking at in what I talked about this afternoon is nothing more than a physical reflection of what is going on in the collective human mind. We have thought this into existence. We are in the period where we are going to and we are thinking it out of existence. Give you an analogy of the difference between the two. I was up at, in Oxfordshire at the White Horse, or White Dragon, could be, in Uffington. And I'm standing there, minding my own business, nice day, you know. And all of a sudden, the place is, oh, where have you been there? The place is awash with sheep. And two of these sheep start to move. The farmer's arrived, standing on his stick next to his Land Rover, you know. And my mouth dropped because every damn sheep starts to move, following these two towards the farm, you see. And the farmer's standing on his stick. And it's all happening before his eyes because they're all following the two. Piece of cake. But what? And that's very much what we've allowed ourselves to be. That's why the crop circle phenomenon was, in the mass human mind, so easy to destroy, because we give our power away. What would happen if that farmer is standing on his stick and those two sheep start to move and the other sheep go, oh, old Bill's going over there, that's interesting. I don't fancy that though. My heart, I'm going over here. And another sheep goes, I'll see you later, I fancy over here myself, this is what I feel I ought to do. Suddenly, the guy's on his stick, I mean, he's going to say solid and go over his tea, isn't he? That herd ceases to be a bewildered herd saying, I'm totally lacking self-worth, I don't know what to think, other people have to tell me what to think, I'll go this way because everyone's going that way, their mind must be right. And suddenly, they're going off in all directions, following their own heart, following what they are. As a result, they become uncontrollable. The time has come for the human race to be uncontrollable. If we are so lacking in a sense of self and a sense of our own potential to control our own lives, that a tiny minority, a tiny clique of people can actually decide the direction of our world, then it is time, wakey time, for the human race, and that's come, and that's with us now. A time to love, respect, and forgive ourselves. And a time to let go of fear, the controlling mechanism of the human race. If a herd of sheep is not doing precisely what the farmer wants them to do as a result of just saying, oh, I'll follow the one in front, what do they introduce? They introduce the farmer's sheepdog, which introduces fear, and that is what happens to the human race. The bewildered herd is controlled by fear. Tomorrow is the first day of the rest of our eternity. It does not get any worse than that. There is nothing to fear. What does it matter what people think about us or say about us or do about us as long as we feel good about ourselves? We are always looking out of ourselves for confirmation that we're okay, for confirmation that what we're doing is right, for blaming people when things go wrong. We never look in here. What do I think of me? You know, when people are nervous about speaking in public, the reason they're nervous about speaking in public is because they're looking out for confirmation that they're okay. You put those same people in an empty room, they'll talk forever. Put them among friends they feel comfortable with, talk forever. Put them in front of an audience they've never seen before, fall apart. Why? Because they're looking to the audience outside of themselves to tell them they're okay. Instead of saying, look, the audience has every right to think I'm a brat. I have every right to think I'm not. So what is there to worry about? If we can love ourselves and respect ourselves, then we find it so much easier to love and respect everyone else. And love and respect are the two forces, the two energy fields that are going to change this world and are changing this world. By love, I don't mean a kind of love that says, I love you if I fancy you, darling, which is kind of what love's become in the public arena. It's not a love that says, I love you if what you do is acceptable to me, and I love you if you conform to what I feel is someone who deserves to be loved. It is a love that says, I love you whatever. I love you, Henry Kissinger. I love you, Lord Carrington. I'm going to challenge what you're doing. But you're part of me and I'm part of you. So love without condition. It's the kind of love we have for our children. We may not like what they do and say all the time, but we love them just the same. And if we can love ourselves, respect ourselves, and therefore love and respect everyone else, we change this world because we change the energy field, the thought patterns that control this world. Everything that happens in this physical world, whether I do that or whatever, is not decided by my body, decided by my mind, my consciousness. My body, my physical level, does what my mind tells it to do. Everything that happens in this physical world is the result of thought, consciousness. That is where the revolution needs to take place. If we have a revolution of thought which turns hatred and resentment and conflict into love, into respect, into forgiveness, then suddenly we have a different mindset, a different magnetic pattern, a different physical reality. The physical reality has to react to the consciousness reality. It has no choice. So, in a way, in a major way, we need to think this thing out of existence by changing what we think of ourselves, and the sum total of that changes what the collective mind thinks of itself, therefore we change the world. That is the position we are in, and that is the period we are in. We are the generations who are living through an increasingly wondrous period of change through which the crop patterns are harbingers of that change, confirmation of that change. The symbols of antiquity that speak to our consciousness without our conscious mind being aware of it. An ancient knowledge, an ancient understanding that has been suppressed for reasons of control that is now reappearing in the world to remove the suppression and remove the misunderstanding. Because we are not stupid, we are not evil, we are just manipulated and allow ourselves to be manipulated. More than anything, I feel we need to do is to get rid of dogma. Dogma within the crop circle movement, dogma within the UFO movement, dogma within religion, within New Age, within all of it. Because there's nothing that a manipulator wants more than a dogmatic mind. If you look across society, what we're actually seeing, divide and rule, are dogmas being played off against each other. If any of us have a dogma, someone somewhere will have the opposite dogma to be played off against ours. So we stand up at criminal justice bill marches, and I hear, it's the Tories, smash the Tories. That's going to change the world, it would even change the light. It's the communists, it's the fascists, it's the Christians, it's the Muslims, it's the Jews. It's the bosses, it's the unions. Bang, bang, dogma, 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 dogma. I think it's a fair thing to say, and I am unanimous in this, that none of us know it all. What a dogma is saying is I do know it all. So if we actually accept we don't know it all, and there's a massive amount of wondrous knowledge to be accessed if we open our minds to it, then dogmas disappear. Because every view and every form of information becomes potentially something to be encompassed, to be looked at and rejected or absorbed, depending on how we feel. What dogmas say is, pull up the drawbridge, something to challenge my belief system, panic stations, and that dogma is played off. We need to let the divisions fall away. They're not real divisions, they're manufactured on the classic principle of divide and rule. The divisions of race, colour, creed, income bracket. The us and the them, when there is an us and them, we are a manipulator's party trick. When the us and them become we, which is what we really are, all aspects of each other, we become a manipulator's nightmare. There's a wonderful song around, the comic relief song, which says, when we stand together, it's our finest hour. We can do anything, anything, anything. Keep believing in love's power. Love can build a bridge between your heart and mine. Love can build a bridge. Don't you think it's time? The great news at this time of change is that week after week, more and more people are awakening and saying yes to that question. And we are the generations who can be the first generations in such a long time who will genuinely leave our children a better world than the one we found. And we'll do it by opening our minds, by opening our hearts, and refusing to be anyone except who we really are, what we really think, and what we really believe we should be. What a great time to be alive. Thank you very much.
Right, who we got?
Well, I'm selling my notes to the National Lottery, by the way. They've offered me 2 and 6. So.
Yeah, just a quick question. You mentioned the people at the very top of the pyramid. Obviously, they have a motivation that only they know. Who do you believe is actually manipulating them to put into place the powers that are currently here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've kind of done a hell of a lot of thinking about this and research and reading and stuff. When you look back at the ancient texts, the Bible and the Vedas and all these other things that go back into antiquity, if you just say into your mind, God equals extraterrestrial, and then read them again, it's astonishing. My own feeling is that the human race as we know it was seeded by extraterrestrials, and some positive, some negative, going way back. And that there has been a form of extraterrestrial consciousness that has sought to control the planet, and control it by controlling the minds of those who are of a vibrational compatibility. I was starting to think more and more about this when about 6 weeks ago, how these things happen to me, I don't know. I turned up at a Mind, Body, Spirit festival in Birmingham, minding my own business, and I walked off the street, and there were all windows and the door and everything. It's a big complex called the Clarendon Suite. Sounds really posh. And I walked in, and once I've walked through the front door, there's not a window in sight in this place. So I said to someone, hey, what is it without the windows then? He said, do you know where you are? I said, no, where am I? I said, Clarendon Suite. He said, no, you're at the centre of Birmingham Freemasonry, you see. So I thought, I've come here to have a go at them, you know. No, not have a go at them, but point a few things out. And it turns out on the Sunday that I'm doing a talk about the manipulation and the Freemasons' part in it. And I'm doing it in one of them big temples, and all the audience are sitting on the squared carpet. I mean, you know, you stand there and you think, I'm going to wake up in a minute, you know, my wife's going to be there and saying, come on, you've been dreaming again. But why I tell the story in relation to this question is, while I was there over 3 days, the guy who ran the place came up, he told me about it. Nice man, because most Freemasons don't realise what they're involved in at all. And he said, all these loads of temples, mate, that no one ever sees, public never see. I said, any chance for a quick look, you know? So he's all, so he takes me into this one, and it's called the Royal Arch Temple. And it's a smallish room, and it's really bizarre place. I mean, they've got chairs around, like carved chairs, like a judge sits in. And then in the centre, they've got a pickaxe, like you see on a building site. God knows what they do with that, you know? And they've got a trowel and all this stuff, and it was kind of weird. But what hit me is, as I opened the door and walked in, the negative energy that hit me was incredible. I can't remember feeling anything quite so powerful and so immediate as that. And this starts a train of thought with me. What the hell goes on with some of these higher level esoteric ceremonies? And my own feeling is that when our intent is positive, our vibrational state is out of the vibrational range of this malevolent consciousness that wishes to create mayhem on the planet. So our vibrational compatibility is not there to be affected by it. But if we are at this point in our evolution, and you know, we're all on a journey, same journey, we are in that vibrational range, there can be vibrational compatibility and some kind of effect. And the closer the vibrational compatibility, the greater the effect. As coincidence would have it, at the same time I get handed a book, one of several I've read, about the Nazis and the background to Adolf Hitler. Basically, it was all based on black esoteric knowledge, or the black use of esoteric knowledge. And at some point, this guy, Hitler, went from a guy you'd pass in the street without turning your head, to a guy of such charisma that he held a nation in his hand. What the hell happened in between? Well, from what I've kind of read in several books and stuff, is that he went through a series of black esoteric ceremonies, initiation ceremonies, basically. And he emerged from them with this charisma. Now, what is charisma? Charisma is a magnetic personality. What is a magnetic personality? It is the power of the magnetic energies we are generating. We're back to what I was talking about earlier. And if we are projecting a very powerful negative energy, that's very magnetic. We talk about fatal attraction and being attracted to people even though they do things we don't like and all that stuff. Just as when we project a positive energy of great power, we become charismatic, same thing. And for me, what happened to Hitler, he very much believed, when you look into it, he very much believed that he was in contact and being controlled by what he called supermen, extraterrestrial supermen and stuff. So did the whole Nazi regime. I mean, the SS was basically a very black secret society. It was all based on that, on esoteric principles, on numerology, the whole shebang. And I think that what happened to Hitler was that there was a colossal vibrational compatibility created by the very powerful initiation ceremonies, which go on in these other secret societies at the higher levels particularly, which locks you into a consciousness, and you basically become a vehicle for that consciousness. And I think that at the very top level, by very top level of this, I have not mentioned anyone this afternoon who's probably really near the top level. They are the public faces. Above them, I think, it's basically a very advanced knowledge of the esoteric principles of the consciousness, of the psyche, of the energy fields, of the force fields, and all this stuff. And it's actually controlled by people who are not in the public eye. And I think their consciousness goes off this planet to an extraterrestrial consciousness. By extraterrestrial, I just mean not of this world, although I do think it does take an extraterrestrial, as we would know, extraterrestrial dimension. And I think that myself, that there are extraterrestrial species who live, if you like, get nourishment from very extreme negative energy. What has happened in this century? What is a war? What is a famine? What is a conflict? What is fear? What is guilt? What is resentment? What is aggression? It is a production line of negative energy. And I think myself that we're looking at a human pyramid that is consciously, its consciousness is controlled by some kind of extraterrestrial force, which has been given many names throughout the generations. Just as I believe myself that the gods from the sky and all that stuff in ancient texts were actually extraterrestrials, I think that the other things like Satan and Lucifer and Set and all these things were another kind of extraterrestrial of a negative variety, which has been passed on symbolically through the generations, and we've lost the fact of what it was really all about. So myself, I think that even at the top level of this pyramid, they are vehicles for a consciousness that goes off this planet, and that one of the reasons for it is the production of negative energy, which we've become brilliant at, but increasingly less so. So again, if you go back to what I was talking about earlier, if we change the nature of the energy we project, basically we cut off the supply, and we change the nature of the energy field of the Earth, on which this extraterrestrial consciousness, or whatever kind it is, thrives. It may be these beings called the Greys and reptilians and all this stuff. I don't know. I've been to that side of it too deeply. I'm looking at themes rather than that sort of thing. But I do think it comes down to extraterrestrials in the end. And it's interesting that when you look into some of the background to the miracles, quote, that have spawned so much of the religious fervour and stuff like that, like the one at Fatima in 1917, when you actually look at what was seen behind all the propaganda about the Virgin Mary vision, what was actually described was a spacecraft, a UFO, doing amazing things. Which in 1917, if you're in a crowd of 70,000, you're expecting a miracle, and you see a spacecraft, you sure as hell think it's a miracle. Just as when they landed in ancient times, you'd sure as hell think they were a god. And they did, I think. So it's extraterrestrial in the end, I think, anyway. And I've kind of held off that, because you think, oh, come on, it's fantastic, all that stuff. But the more you go into it, the more very obvious it becomes for me.
David, what about the other side of that balance, the positivity versus that negativity, and the fact that, as you say, more and more people are raising their awareness, remembering who they are, and working towards the light? Do you feel that that is helped in a similar sort of way from the other side of that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I'm full enough. You should call me the prophet of doom. I'm actually desperately enthusiastic about this whole period. The way I see what's happening, we all have these emotions, and we have experiences, and we have things we don't really want to deal with, right? So we push them inside ourselves, don't we? And we say, look, all right, don't want to talk about it, okay? Just change the subject. Just change the subject. Don't want to talk about it, okay? And it will go away, okay? And we push it inside ourselves, but it's there. It may be resentment, it may be guilt, it may be fear, it may be whatever. Don't want to talk about it, and it eats us away. And it affects the pattern we project, so it affects what we attract, therefore it creates the physical reality. In the end, particularly now, loads of people are experiencing this, in the end, we will attract to us what we need to evolve. And what we need to evolve is to deal with what's stopping us evolving. Therefore, what we suppress and say, don't want to talk about it, eventually it's before our eyes and we've got no choice but to deal with it. And this line of we attract to us what we most fear is so obvious for me. I mean, when I look back through my life and I look at others, and you say, I can't believe it, mate, my worst nightmare, and it happened. Because we attract it, we create it, because fear is a great block on evolution, so we've got to deal with what we fear so we can let it go and move on. Now, what's happening on the collective level for me at this time is exactly that. All that's been suppressed and hidden and undealt with is rising to the surface. And it can be dealt with. When it's here, we can say, hey, I can see what's going on now, we can deal with this. If it's suppressed, we go on thinking the United Nations is a place of creating peace and freedom and all that stuff, when it's exactly the opposite, and 99% of the people working for the United Nations don't realise that. And they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, a lot of them anyway. They really believe that that's the way forward. They don't realise they're being manipulated. So that would go on, and the control would get greater. But now, here we're seeing the muck rise to the surface now. And then we can deal with it. So I'm extremely enthusiastic about this time and about the future. Because when I look back, I mean, I've been involved in this now since the top of my head went off in about late 1990, and I was staggering around wondering what planet I was on for a while. And when I look back, it's a bit like the European community. It's only when you stop and look back how far things have come in the last 4 years, you realise how far things have come. By the end of this decade, this tidal wave that it will become of opening minds and the sheep becoming the people saying, I'm going off here, I don't know about you, but I'm going here, will become uncontrollable. I mean, Gandhi said towards the end of British rule in India, 100,000 Englishmen cannot control 300 million Indians if those Indians will not cooperate. And we're stopping to cooperating. And we'll see that, it can't happen. If you look down at Shoreham now, the number of animals that are passing through Shoreham is dramatically reduced because of people saying, sorry, don't believe in this, going to stand up for what I believe in. And this robots rebellion, as I call it, is gathering pace. It really is. People in so many walks of life, all different walks of life, are starting to awaken and see, hold on a minute, this is not as I thought it was. And what I feel is happening is that this conscious level that is in some way, probably through manipulation, has been delinked from the higher infinite levels of ourselves, is probably through vibrational changes, which the crop patterns really are a sign of, a harbinger of these changing times. Because of these vibrational changes, people are awakening and locking back into their infinite potential. So suddenly, it's not just the conscious level, looking through the eyes and hearing through the ears, it's multidimensional levels of it. So at that point, the same eyes look, see the same situation, but perceive it in a very different way. And this changing perception process is something that is going to sweep this away. And it's kind of interesting, going on from that into another area, but very much related, is that what the response to this is. One of the things I've done a lot of research for this next book I've just finished is the cults. There is a knowledge at the highest levels of this pyramid that there is this consciousness shift going on. And one of the responses to it, which is another reason we need to be kind of wise to just taking things on face value, is to devalue the word cult to the point where the public reaction, reflex action to the word cult, is dangerous nutters. Once you've devalued the word cult, then you apply the word cult to anything you want to devalue. And it's kind of interesting, one of the things that started giving the word cult a really bad name was the thing called the Jonestown Massacre in Guyana, the People's Temple of Jim Jones in 1978. When you look into the background of the People's Temple, it was a CIA front. When you look at Waco, Waco was just a genocide, really. There's no need for all that stuff. When you look at the way cults are being, you look at the one in Switzerland, what happened in Switzerland one was suddenly it was, mass suicide by religious nutters. Mass murder, that's right. And then, suicide first, then it was mass murder. Then they blamed it on the two leaders. Then one of the leaders was found to be among the dead, therefore they blamed it on the other leader. Then the other leader was found to be among the dead, and it's just gone away. But what kind of happens, and this is a very important way that we're kind of mind controlled, is at the point the thing breaks, there is mass coverage of the event, and we get the official line explanation. Then the real truth starts to come out, but it's all died down by then. So if you said to most people in the world now who could remember it, Jonestown, religious nutters, mate, killed themselves. It wasn't nothing like that at all. And I've gone one stage further, and I've looked at the cult-busting organisations. There's one in particular called the Cult Awareness Network. And it's a CIA front. And was involved in Jonestown, and was involved in Waco, and what have you, and so forth. It was the Cult Awareness Network that first floated the story of child abuse at Waco, which was shown to be totally untrue by a 9-week study of the children. Interestingly then, that among the lists of what are defined as cults by this Cult Awareness Network are flying saucer cults, crop circle cults, Buddhist cults, spiritualist cults, lifestyle cults. I've said in the book somewhere, the only thing missing is going down the shops to get tonight's dinner cult. So what you do is you devalue the word cult, and then you apply it to whatever you want to devalue. So from our point of view, I think it's very important that we just hold off a little bit when we see on the news, another cult's done this, another cult's done that. There's three ways of manipulating it. One is to create the cult yourself, one is to infiltrate the cult, and one is to blame the cult for something they didn't actually do. Any of those three kind of work on the public mind. And that's certainly going on now. And I think that it's time for all these areas that genuinely wish to build a better world. The environmental movement, the New Age movement, and crop circles and UFOs and stuff, actually make sure we're streetwise enough not to be duped. Because the more I've kind of gone into all this stuff, it is quite staggering. Do you know every major environmental report since the 60s of a global nature has actually been done by the same people? The same people. The first head of the UN Environment Agency was a guy called Maurice Strong, Canadian oil millionaire. The guy who ran the 1992 Earth Summit in Brazil was Maurice Strong, Canadian oil millionaire. A member of the Club of Rome, another environmental wing of this Illuminati stroke Bilderberg Group network, Roundtable network. One of the front members is Maurice Strong, Canadian oil millionaire, who is very close to the Rockefellers and wrote books with Rockefellers and the Trilateral Commission and such like on the environment, saying basically centralisation is a very good way of stuff to sort out the environment, problem, reaction, solution. Maurice Strong, Canadian oil millionaire, who is on the Commission for Global Governance, which is run by a guy called Sonny Ramphal, the former Secretary General of the Commonwealth, which is now reported talking about the need for world government and such like. Maurice Strong, Canadian oil millionaire, who was behind the Our Common Future, the so-called Brundtland Report on environmental issues a few years ago, which became a Bible of the environmental movement. Maurice Strong, Canadian oil millionaire, and his sidekick, Jim McNeil, who also was involved in writing books with the Trilateral Commission on the environment. And it was interesting, when I started to look into all this, I came across another guy who is a really big environmental name, particularly in America, called Lester R. Brown, who runs something called the World Watch Institute. And I thought, I've got one of his books. And what happens is every year they produce a book, State of the World 1989, State of the World 1990, State of the World 1991. I had State of the World 1989, so I thought, this is interesting, I'm going to have a look, see what's in it. And I opened it, you know. The author wishes to thank the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, so on and so forth, for financing this book. So there's not a, I'm not disputing, crikey, not with my background, that there's not an environmental situation that needs to be sorted. My question is, why do we have this situation, and how is it being exploited as a global problem in search of a global solution? Because that's what's happening. And so it's about getting streetwise. It's not saying, well, Friends of the Earth ought to stop doing this, or Greenpeace ought to stop doing that. Not at all. Just to say, hold on a minute, let's have the wider picture here. And what a great question that I started to ask myself again and again when I see a situation is, who benefits? It's a real eye-opener. You know, when you see a situation where something happens in the world and we're obviously being given an explanation that we're being asked to believe about why that's happened, who's behind it, what's the reason for it. If you ask the question, who benefits from me believing what I'm clearly being asked to believe? Crikey, you know, you really do start to see through some of these smoke screens. There was a Roman playwright and philosopher, he was called Seneca or something like that, and he said, he who benefits most from a crime is the one most likely to have committed it. And when you kind of look at that, you start to get a bit more streetwise. I'll be honest, it may be controversial, I'm sure it is, I've not been known to be controversial before. When that bomb went off in Oklahoma, alarm bells went off in my head. And I said to my wife, they're going to use this to erase more freedoms in America. I said they're going to go for those militias, and they're going to use it as an opportunity to move this whole thing on. Within 48 hours, Bill Clinton had called for greater powers for the FBI because of the obvious, horrific reaction of the American people. There's no way anyone in Congress is going to go against that. And he also, interestingly, a quote, called for the easing of limitations on the military's involvement in law enforcement. I get American newspapers from from America, sent to me on a weekly or fortnightly basis. They're not newspapers that I actually agree with in terms of their philosophy on life. They're into Christian patriotism. You know, it's pretty much the mindset of some of these militia organisations. I mean, personally, I wouldn't pull a trigger to save your life. I see no point. But what the militias were doing was, although I don't agree with their approach, they were getting information out about the New World Order. And in America, it was starting to really move. And when I look back after the Oklahoma bombing, 3 months, previous 3 months of these newspapers, there was a very clear pattern all the way through. And that is the way the FBI, this organisation with not enough power, was harassing the militias and arresting people on spurious charges and stuff like that, and generally harassing them and what have you. Suddenly, in the midst of this, although none of this has got in the media, in the midst of this, suddenly a bomb goes off and they get the blame for it. And not just 1 or 2 people who maybe did it or didn't do it, I don't know. The whole thing is blamed for it. And one of the other things that Bill Clinton has gone for this week are the talk shows, which are just about the only vehicle for getting this information out into the public arena in America about what's going on. He's gone for that. And I was listening to Radio 5, it got so ridiculous now, and it's not even subtle. Radio 5 the other day had a clip of a congressional hearing. And there was this guy from the Bureau of, what order is it? The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. It was the group that was responsible for Waco. And this guy said in this congressional hearing, look, I worked for this organisation in the 60s, he said. It was rotten to the core then, and it's rotten to the core now. And suddenly in comes this big booming Texas accent from this congressman saying, you shut up, he said, you can't say that, it was saying things like that that caused Oklahoma. And so we've got this climate of close it down, don't attack the government, don't put out this information because you are encouraging terrorists. Now when I put all that into the pot, I think it's not asking too much justification to be just a little bit suspicious of what the background to all that is. Because terrorist bombs are a big aspect of problem reaction solution. In Italy during the 70s, there was a massive amount of terrorism run by an organisation called the Red Brigades. One of the things they did was to abduct a guy called Aldo Moro, former Italian Prime Minister, and he was murdered when he was abducted. There was the Bologna railway station bombing, loads of things, and it was basically organised by this Freemasonry group called the P2. And as it's been pointed out by other people too, why did they call it P2? Where is P1? Well, P1 is either in Britain or it's in America for sure. Now, what was not reported in this country, and certainly not reported in America, astoundingly, is that when they had a hearing into the death of Aldo Moro, his closest associate said that a major world American politician had threatened Aldo Moro that unless he changed his policies in Italy, then he would be severely dealt with. And of course the next thing is that he was abducted and murdered, and the guy named the fella who said it to him, and the name he named was Henry Kissinger. That was not reported in the Washington Post or the New York Times or any of that stuff. Widely reported in Italy, obviously. When Bhutto was hung after the coup in Pakistan, he wrote a letter from prison pointing out that he had been visited while still Prime Minister by Henry Kissinger, who had said, unless you change your policies on the nuclear power stuff, that your nuclear power policies, you will be made an example of. Now none of this stuff kind of comes out, except in the off-mainstream newspapers and the off-mainstream organisations. So terrorism, indeed there were aspects of the Red Brigades organisations who actually did say that the CIA were at the back of it. As I understand it, P2 was controlled through a Freemasonry lodge in Switzerland and eventually by the CIA, whoever's above the CIA. So terrorism is a great form of problem reaction solution. So when I see terrorism in America, particularly now, where it's never been before, at a time when this New World Order thing is moving on quicker, and it's moving on quicker for the very reason you spoke of, They know this consciousness switch is taking place, and the time is running out to bring this into being. And the more information gets in the public arena, the harder it becomes. And so there is now a panic to rush on. This is why the European community thing is being rushed on, central bank, and the microchipping thing's being pushed on. The whole thing's moving more rapidly because it's known that the game is going to be up very soon, and there's panic on. And so I think we're going to see in this decade some amazing events of positive and negative kinds, and it's being streetwise to say who benefits from this will stop us getting duped into starting hurling blame at people. Because just finishing the point, it was quite a statement about how easy people are to be duped when they pick up a guy immediately after the Oklahoma bombing who's of Arab descent, and he finds out to be totally innocent and nothing to do with the Arabs. But in the meantime, between him being picked up and it being announced that it wasn't an Arab thing, that he's totally innocent, his family were harassed, and people who were Arabic or even looked Arabic in the street were harassed, just because the government said, we think there's an Arab connection. If we don't get streetwise, we're just going to be on the end of the string. The more and more people get streetwise, that's the good news.
David, we're going to leave it there now.
All right, thanks.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, before you go, David leaves us, there's this one little item which we would like. We have some people who would like to have a quick word with David, if they would like to come out. And here they come. Happy birthday, David.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Back up. It's one of these special ones where the flame goes out. It's really good.
Big smile.
Thank you ever so much.
Yeah, if the candles had stayed on, we could all sit around and have a channel, couldn't we?
Thank you very much, David. Thank you.